Let's go back in time to 1920s Chicago, a city where the law, well, it was more of a suggestion. The only order that really mattered came from one man. Just the sound of his name could bring a whole street to a dead silence. This is the story of that man, Al Capone, and the empire of blood and booze he built from the ground up. And here's the crazy thing. This is how he saw himself. Whenever anyone pushed back on his, let's call them operations, his answer was always the same. I am just a businessman. He tried to sell this image of a guy who was just, supplying what people wanted. So what kind of business are we talking about here? At his peak, back in 1927, Al Capone's annual income was estimated to be $100 million. Now, to put that in perspective, that's over $1.5 billion in today's money. Yeah, this wasn't just any business. This was a full-blown empire. To really get how he built this thing, you have to understand the power he had. For almost 10 years, Al Capone wasn't just some gangster. No, he was the undisputed king of Chicago. He was basically running a shadow government, where his word was the only law that mattered. I mean, just stop and think about that level of control for a second. The police? They wouldn't make a move without getting his okay first. Politicians? They pretty much owed their entire careers to him. And the city's judges? They were on his payroll. For all intents and purposes, Capone was the government and the court in Chicago. So the real question is, how does anybody get that powerful? How does a kid who drops out of school in the 6th grade, the son of poor Italian immigrants from Brooklyn, rise up to become the most powerful man in one of America's biggest cities? Okay, let's trace his path. His early life was, pretty rough. Poverty, a quick temper. He actually got kicked out of school for hitting a teacher. And after that, he fell in with street gangs. But the real game changer came in 1920. His mentor, Johnny Torrio, called him out to Chicago, a city that was just overflowing with opportunity. And in just 5 short years, by the time he was 26, the whole criminal operation was his. And the reason for this insane, explosive rise? It all comes down to 2 words. Prohibition. The second the government made alcohol illegal, they didn't actually stop people from drinking. Nope, they just created a golden opportunity for criminals. Capone looked at Chicago, saw a city full of thirsty people, and decided he was going to control the whole shebang, from the illegal breweries, to the trucks, to the thousands of secret bars or speakeasies. And this quote right here, this was the core philosophy he learned from his mentor. Torrio taught him that crime could be run like a real organized business, not just with, mindless violence. So Capone made this his mantra. Always try to make a deal first. But if you didn't take that deal, well, that's when the trouble would start. So, with this business-first attitude, Capone took total control and just blew up the Chicago outfit into this massive corporate-style criminal empire. He was using modern business ideas for crime, controlling everything from top to bottom, and setting up monopolies through deals, bribes, and when that didn't work, just brutal force. The scale of it was just staggering. He had an army, a literal army. At its height, more than 1,000 gangsters worked directly for him, making sure his will was done all across the city. And you better believe he paid them well. His weekly payroll was $300,000. To put that in perspective, that's more than a lot of major, legitimate companies were spending at the time. This wasn't a gang. It was a criminal corporation. But let's be really clear about how this empire was held together. Behind all the money and the slick organization was pure, raw brutality. Between 1920 and 1930, it's estimated that more than 200 people were killed on Al Capone's orders. And this, right here, was the core of Al Capone's public genius. He managed to create 2 totally different images of himself at the same time. The public saw the myth, this Robin Hood guy who opened soup kitchens for the poor during the Great Depression. The media loved him, painting him as this glamorous celebrity. But the reality? A man who ruled through fear, bribery, and just merciless murder, even taking out a public prosecutor who had the guts to go after him. For years, Capone played this balancing act perfectly. The public was fascinated, and the law just couldn't seem to touch him. But then, one single, bloody event completely shattered his carefully built image and turned the entire country against him. It was called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. On February 14, 1929, Capone's guys, dressed up as cops, walked into a rival gang's headquarters and executed 7 men. The pure, cold-blooded way they did it, lining them all up against a wall, it horrified the nation. Pictures of the scene were everywhere. And just like that, the myth of the charming businessman was dead.
This wasn't just a Chicago problem anymore. No, this went all the way to the top. The massacre was so shocking that President Herbert Hoover himself held a secret meeting in the White House and gave a simple, direct order: get Capone.
But here was the problem. They couldn't actually prove he was behind the massacre. So the government got creative. They decided to go after his money. An elite squad of federal agents, led by a guy named Elliot Ness, was put together. They became famous as the Untouchables, and for one very simple reason. Capone threw fortunes at them in bribes, but they couldn't be bought. They were the one part of the system he just couldn't corrupt. So the man who seemed completely untouchable was about to meet his end. And his downfall was every bit as dramatic as his rise, just in a totally different and much sadder way. In 1931, the law finally nailed him. Not for murder, but for tax evasion. He got 11 years and was eventually shipped off to Alcatraz, a place where his power and his money meant absolutely nothing. His health, which had been destroyed by untreated syphilis, totally collapsed. He got out of prison early in 1939, a completely broken man, and died quietly at his home in 1947. And maybe the most powerful statement about his fall came the year before he died. His own doctor said that the man who once ran Chicago like his personal kingdom, the criminal mastermind of a massive empire, now had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old child. His own lifestyle had literally destroyed his brain. So we're left with this final question, right? Was Al Capone just some uniquely ruthless monster? A one-of-a-kind evil guy? Or was he simply the inevitable result of a flawed law? A law that created a billion-dollar black market that was just sitting there, waiting for someone smart enough and brutal enough to come along and take it over. What do you think?